Guys, we've done it. We've gotten to the end of Dubliners by James Joyce. This is the final video in a read along series for James Joyce's Dubliners, the collection of short stories, and inasmuch this will appear in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being the short story discussion playlist, but also the short story by short story read along of James Joyce and Dubliners. The short story in question today is known as The Dead. So we have a So What Happened portion, which is a recap of the short story, a literary criticism portion of the video where we talk about all of the literary something's goings on, and a writer's corner portion of the video where we talk about some of the notes that we can take from this story as writers of fiction ourselves. So, what happened? First off, I just have to say it. I feel as if I have just read a Jane Austen novel. So, there's that. I got that off my chest. If you have been around this channel for any period of time, you know what that means. To me, finishing a Jane Austen novel, there's a disconnect between yours truly and the literature of Jane Austen. So, what happened? It's a party, a Christmas party, and a big one. Mrs. Morkan's annual dance, Christmas dance and hullabaloo, don't you know? It's a sequel, it's an Irish hullabaloo, don't you know? Always an event, but Gabriel and his wife are late. Still, he shows up. He asks Lily when she's getting married, and she gets mad at him. Then he wonders whether or not he should recite poetry, considering most of these people's lack of education. And the whole night kind of goes like this with Gabriel. Um, he is a precarious character. He's someone that is difficult to find a liking for as a reader. And it goes on this way, him very heavily invested in himself, until he witnesses his wife, who is listening to one of the other partygoers singing an old Irish tune, and she seems to be on the verge of tears. He tries to figure out why she's upset, but even she doesn't seem to know, at least not at first. She doesn't seem to understand it any better than he does. When they get to their room, she tells him about a boy she used to know, a boy who used to sing that very same song. It was a boy that was in love with her and had taken ill when she was about to leave for convent. They were disallowed from seeing each other, her and this young boy who was in love with her, until one rainy night when he ends up tossing gravel at her window. Pardon me. Maybe I'm taking ill too. I'll be tossing gravel at your window any evening now. She sneaks out to see him and tells him he's got to get out of the rain. He's going to die. He's sick. He can't be out there like that. He says he'd rather die. He doesn't want her to leave. He does not want to stop seeing her. Eventually, he goes. But he dies shortly thereafter. Surprise. After telling her story to Gabriel, she falls asleep. And Gabriel is left to wonder where he fits into all of this. So, what are we talking about with this short story? The whole thing feels very ephemeral, does it not? Gabriel's present in Gabriel's present tense in the story is intertwined very flawlessly with his memories as he goes about the night, but also intertwined very seamlessly from a narrative standpoint with the ought to do's that he feels for his wife. I ought to take her by the hand, right? All of these things, they are all presented in the same type of narrative as is the story written. This makes the present, the past, and the future, by the way, just finished a series on reading A Christmas Carol past, present, and future. And the review for that will be coming shortly. So if you were interested in that sort of thing, but everything feels very intertwined in a way that makes it almost as if Gabriel is never really alive, right? He's always living up here, always living basically in this uh, frontal lobe. He's always chastising himself. He's always moralizing for someone else. He's always asking the question about what someone else would en- what someone else would enjoy or not enjoy him doing. So he's never really present in the now, even when he has escaped this party and he is alone with his wife. He's spending all of his time with his wife, remembering things they had done and ought to doing into the future. But he's never really there. He's never really grabbing the moment and executing, if you will. Now, the first three quarters, moving on to point two here, the first three quarters of this story are Gabriel lost in his own sort of egotistical haze, wondering how he fits into things. The end of the story is Gabriel realizing that his wife is a real person. Who would have thought? Um, she has a past as well. Now, this might seem like a silly thing to note, but how often do we do this in our real lives? Where was your mother before you were born? How often do you think about that? And I don't mean like moments before you were born. You don't want to think about that. I mean your mother when she was, say, 19. What was your mother up to back then? Not you. We all know what your mother was up to back then. You know what I'm saying, though, right? Everyone's reality is very you centric. So it is not surprising that Gabriel's reality is this way, but we still look down on it. We still feel in this story as if, and here's the thing, Gabriel's never really nefarious with it, is he? Maybe I'm misreading the character. He seems very egocentric, he seems very egotistical, but he doesn't seem to necessarily. So when he makes the comment about, well, maybe I shouldn't recite poetry because none of them have educations, he's looking down on them perhaps, but he's not condescending, I don't think. He is not saying they are lesser people for not knowing poetry, just that they don't know poetry. Probably they are not as well read as Gabriel. But what a literary moment for Gabriel to come to this realization. And even in the moment, so those are the moments perhaps where he gets to be a bit manipulative. You read him deciding, I'm going to get jealous here. But that's very real, isn't it? That doesn't make him the worst guy in the world, does it? It makes him very understandable, doesn't it? We might not like him in those moments, but probably we've all had those moments. That's something James Joyce is very good at doing. James Joyce is very good at giving the bad guy moments where you identify with him, the creep moments where you identify with him, and also very good at giving the good guy moments where you feel a little bit estranged from him. Technically, this is both, as Gabriel is sort of a weirdo in this story, but he's also the protagonist. So we can't overlook that. Um, but I want to move on to point number three here. Everything we've said about this story so far, Gabriel kind of ends up being a creep. He shows up at this party, very grandiose about himself. His wife sort of skitters about. and he's being Gabriel all the while. And then he comes across his wife, and his wife has become sullen, right? They go back to the apartment, and the whole time, Gabriel's trying to understand, what's going on here? What's wrong with my honey bunny? And then she says, "Look, I had a spell put on me by that song. It triggered something, and it was a deep memory I didn't realize I had, but I have this memory where there was this young man that I was in love with, and he was in love with me, and he was especially in love with me. We did great together, and he died." And she passes out. She passes out sort of you could almost feel the anxiety in her, right? And that anxiety, that anxiousness, that unctuousness, the angst in her blood passes once she has let go of the story, and she falls asleep. And then Gabriel is the creep wondering how he fits into all of this. Okay, yeah, I'm there with you. And I shouldn't do this because I don't think that this is always applicable. I don't think it's always applicable. But look, you feel the wife in this story being very you find yourself empathizing with her, right? Probably we all had a sweetheart when we were younger, and things didn't work out for one reason or another. And that still tugs at us, right? We're only human. And then you got this psychopath thinking only about himself the entire time. I want to know what happens if you flip the genders. I don't think that this is always an applicable criticism. I think that sometimes the story is just what the story is, right? Regardless of male, female, etc. But for just to humor your old buddy Adrian, let's flip the genders. A man and his wife, a woman and her husband, show up at a party where she is sort of the life of the night. She is uber popular at this party. And she goes about the whole time kind of building her identity, trying to identify herself, trying to build what it means to be Greta. And she's on a roll, baby. Yeah. She's getting that done, and people are eating it up. And later on in the evening, she finds the old stick in the mud upstairs, and it is what it is, right? His mood sours, right? Okay, fine. He's getting kind of busy pants. Now we gotta leave, right? Story of my life. On the way home, he just doesn't want to talk, right? That sour mood. By the time they get home, he spends the rest of the evening telling her about his high school sweetheart, and then he passes out. And then the lovely lady of our story spends the rest of the evening reconstructing her identity based on this new sort of lower level that she has in her man's eyes. She doesn't feel she's his number one anymore, so she must be lesser. She's never known that type of love. How come in both of these situations, it's the male character that feels like the bad guy, and it's the female character with whom we want to identify, with whom we empathize, with whom we sympathize, for whom we sympathize, I suppose? Why is that? Or is it? If you reverse those roles, if you reverse the gender roles there, is she still the egomaniacal one? Or did I just take too many English literature classes in college? Am I predisposed to believing that a story where a woman thinks only about herself is about identity, and a story where a man thinks only about himself is about a psychopath? Is that a me thing? You tell me. I don't know. The last thing that I have here, the last note that I have on the literary criticism part of this, how similar, and it's not going, I mean, it's not a direct translation, but how sort of similar does this story sound to Romeo and Juliet, the story of Greta and her high school sweetheart? They are disallowed from seeing each other, and he sneaks out to see her. He's tossing pebbles up at the window. She comes out. She sneaks out to be with him. But this time, Juliet doesn't drink the sauce. Is there an interpretation of this to be had there? Is there here in the questioning of what happens when Juliet lives? The star-crossed lovers. What happens? What happens when one of the lovers doesn't die and has to go on living? Is there anything of value in life after the loss of that one great love? Perhaps along similar lines to this question, and that's an open question. I don't know if I have the answer to that question. Maybe that's not something that is intentionally put in this story, but I don't care if it's intentionally put in this story. It's something interesting to talk about. Anyway, we have here the case of Greta, who did survive the lover and has taken another lover that maybe she doesn't want to have to love. I want to love her, I don't have to love. No, just me. I'm old. Writer's notes. I have one brief one, and I have one that is interesting to talk about. On page 134 of the Dubliners collection that I have, in a kink of high pitched bronchitic laughter. What an orgasmic phrase. In a kink of high pitched bronchitic laughter. You know exactly what that is. You know exactly what that is. And those are words that are telling you a little bit, but they're words that are so gloriously well used that it is showing you exactly what James Joyce is trying to communicate here. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about. How long is a short story? In this standard sized print, The Dead is 34 pages long. Is that a good length for a short story? And look, I will admit that this was a challenging read for me because there's a lot of people going left and right. There's a lot of, what do they call it? Happiness and joy. I don't do real good with those things. There's a lot going on in this short story, but it really seems like movement as opposed to action. And especially, I would argue that James Joyce is capable of so much more from the standpoint of little touches, right? Little things to look at along the way, nice little images that stick with you. And maybe, it's just my reading. I didn't get them from this short story in particular, but I didn't feel a whole lot there at all. Is this short story too long for what James Joyce was doing? I think there are arguments to be had in both directions. One of the examples that I often give when talking about long short stories is George Saunders. George Saunders has written many long short stories. But the thing with George Saunders is they're normally pretty enjoyable every page along the way because of George Saunders' writing style. Irreverent. Um, there are shiny things along the way. Here in this short story, we don't have a whole lot of that. It's just people at a party. And aside from that one phrase about a kink of bronchitic laughter, there's not even a whole lot of turns of phrase. And I think that I don't know if that's the point of it, right? If that's the point of it, okay, we can have that argument along those lines. I don't think the length of this short story is the point of it. I think that we could have gotten the picture, and I think that definitely James Joyce is good enough a writer that he could have given us this ego basket of Gabriel in much shorter terms than what we ended up getting it. And the emotional twist at the end of this story would have come across just as strongly, would have come across just as much of a punch in the gut without, say, 10 pages of those 34 pages. My real issue is not that it's a long, short story, but that it feels like a long, short story. I think that there are appropriate lengths for all short stories. There's some Ernest Hemingway stories that I kind of wish were 5 pages longer. There's some of these stories that I kind of wish were 5 pages longer. And not just because they were an enjoyable read, but because I think there's more there that I wasn't able to dig out of the short story. So, how long is a short story? From a writer's perspective, what is the point of a long short story? Is there a point where writing a short story, it turns into something else? Like I said at the beginning of this video, it feels like I read an entire Jane Austen novel. Jane Austen novels are a little bit longer than 34 pages, but they're a lot like this story. So that's all I have for The Dead by James Joyce. If you enjoy this sort of thing, hitting the like button really does help me out on the channel, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, so consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more. This is the final video in the read-along portion. I hope to come back with uh, a review for this collection of short stories, as well as a ranking of the short stories. Um, I'll be throwing pebbles at your window anytime now. Uh, so if you might look forward to that sort of thing, be sure to come back for those videos as well.